Well, I did not plan to have this on my desk for this, but it is on my desk for a reason. This is my Mendy. I'll go ahead and I'll start. About 25 years ago, I was having massive brain fog in Silicon Valley. It turns out I had had a toxic brain poisoning, I had brain damage from exposure to mold toxins. And Dr. Daniel Amen from Amen Clinics, who's got about 500,000 brain scans, diagnosed that. And I'm actually on his board of directors now, and I'm also an advisor to Mendy. And I tried to fix it with all sorts of stuff. And it put me on this path of trying neurofeedback 25 years ago. And today I also run my own neurofeedback institute that does, all kinds of high-end five-day in-person stuff. And what I've looked for ever since that first time 25 years ago, I went to a chiropractor's office and he glued electrodes in my hair with like crap, like glue, like paste. Ben's kind of laughing right now because you've had a lot of electrode paste on your head too, right? And yeah, and so the field has changed so far where I at that time said I'll just buy this home unit. This is 1998, and it didn't work that well, and half the time I felt tweaked. And then I became aware of all these different ways of improving my brain, and I without trying to brag, my brain works better. My lab tests say I'm 39. The calendar says I'm 51. My brain response time says I'm 18. And like, I feel so good. My brain works better than it ever has. This stuff is real. But how do you get there? And how do you get there in the least amount of time and effort and money? Well, I had a problem paying attention. In fact, I had Asperger's syndrome and I had ADHD. And I probably still do have HDAD, but it doesn't affect my life in a negative way. It's actually a superpower because I can pay attention as much as I want. And what I did to do this is I learned how to fix my biology. And I would refer you guys, one of my books is called Headstrong, about getting the mitochondria working. But along the way, I said, God, I got to get blood into the front of my brain because I know when I'm failing in my tests at Wharton that the scans are showing that there is no blood here. So I'm trying to do something that I know how to do and I cannot perform no matter how much I want to. And the trick was getting metabolic activity in the front. So actually now 12 years ago, I found a device that was soldered together. I had to make it myself that would let me read the blood flow in the front of my brain. And I used this to fix that problem so I could focus. And I wanted to commercialize it. I didn't have time. And I met Moha a couple of years ago and I said, and he told me he was doing, so I said, I know about this thing called HEG feedback. And no one knows about this. And there's only one company out there I've seen in recent years that's doing anything useful. It's called Mendy. And he goes, dude, I'm CEO. I'm like, are you kidding? So, because I hand built a Mendy 10 plus years ago that didn't work nearly as well. And I used it to fix my brain. I even used it on a few other people. But the tech behind this goes back 40 or 50 years. And the idea that you can change your brain, change your body, you can teach yourself to make your little finger warm if you want to. It's the easiest kind of teaching. Your body knows how to move blood very easily. What the menu's doing is looking at why is there no blood in the front of your brain? And then like, what do I do? Do I make one eye bigger? No, it's a thing you do inside you that moves blood around. So your prefrontal cortex, like the part of you that thinks, part of you that's aware, so it works better, more reliably, so you can trust it. So I'm just the biggest fan, and it was before I even knew anything about the company other than finally someone made what I dreamed of. So that's my intro.
That's an awesome intro. To be honest, for me, it's pretty surreal as a Costa Rican guy who barely graduated high school to be here with the godfather of biohacking, the father of biohacking, I guess is the right terminology. Dave, many of you know, coined the term. And super knowledgeable guy that's helped so many people, obviously, and who has basically made himself be in the best shape of his life at 51, like he said, and that many of us have learned so much from. Ben Ryan, who Ben is, I met Ben because I DM'd him on Instagram randomly about, when was this, like a year and a half ago or something like that, during, I remember it was mid-pandemic, maybe 2 years ago, and I just remember saying, I love content that you make on neuroscience because I can understand it and it makes a lot of sense for me. And, I became involved in Mendy because I was a user. So it's a very different, and I'm just fascinated by the effects that it had on me, on my sleep, for example, my not insomnia, my nightmares, basically, my ADHD, and my emotional regulation overall. And obviously a little thing called PTSD from my time in war, in my time in Libya. So basically, I just found something that really helped me, that really worked. And I wanted to ask smarter people like Dave and Ben, why is it working and why doesn't everybody have access to it? I DM'd Ben. I went to Stanford. He showed me the neuroscience department. I saw everything they were doing. I got to know him, and he's like, you know what? Like, I have a no bullshit approach. I do things, with a very, very strict moral compass. And then and there, him and I became very closely aligned. And I'll pass it on to you, Ben.
Well, thank you so much, Moha, for that very splendid introduction and for having me. So yeah, as Moha said, my name is Ben. I'm a neuroscientist. I work at Stanford, and I'm also an advisor for Mendy. And yeah, Moha and I became affiliated through Instagram, of all places, because I do a lot of science communication on there. It is my opinion that science is really cool and really useful and fantastic, and I do it myself, but it's very distant from the public. So I try to make it accessible by explaining it in very clear and not jargon-filled terminology. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm also a user of Mendy. My Mendy is sitting on my shelf right here behind me. It was on my little demonstration skull here for the longest time, and then I decided that I wanted to give it its own little space here. But yeah, I'm a user and as well, and happy to answer any questions, of course, from the audience and share how I use it in my experience, and clarify whatever I can. But unfortunately, I don't have as cool of a story as Dave, which was really captivating. You're a very cool guy, Dave.
Oh, thanks, Ben. I actually think you're the cooler guy. In my early career, when I was 26 years old, I made 26, or not 26. I made $6 million. It'd be worth 26 million in today's dollars, but I lost it when I was 28. So before I lost it, I'm like, dude, I'm set for light. I'm going to go get a degree in neuroscience and a degree in psychopharmacology. So basically, I wanted to study neuroscience and hallucinogens was my next step after that time in Silicon Valley. And then when basically a series of bad dot-com bubble crashes led by large government policymakers crashed the whole economy, I was like, man, I gotta have to work for a while longer. And who would ever thought that I'd end up as a biohacker when I went from being a 300-pound computer hacker who couldn't pay attention and was pissed off all the time, that I would like Moha, I would have to learn how to address ADHD and learn how to really rewire my brain. It goes beyond just what you can do with Mendy, which I consider to be fundamental. Like, everyone should do this. I'm actually paying my kids for sessions on this, because my idea here is the more I pay them to do Mendy, the less I'm going to have to spend on college assistance for them. But literally, you want kids who behave and can behave, learn how to have metabolic activity in the prefrontal cortex. Like, it's so fundamental. If I'd had this, I probably wouldn't have failed out the first college degree I had. And like I said, guys, I did graduate from Wharton, but just barely. This would have made my studies so much easier. And I've now interviewed more than 1,200 people, including a lot of neuroscientists on my podcast. There's one a Webby. It's called The Human Upgrade. And to be able to pay attention, I'll do 4 or 5 episodes a day when I'm home sometimes. 4 or 5, or that's actually 8 hours of interview time, focus, paying attention. I couldn't do it until I trained my brain. So I'm so grateful that not just that I have metabolic activity, but I have it in the right place. And that's where I think Mendy can be transformational. Anyone who just kind of finds you zone out sometimes, like, will train your brain to behave itself. This is a lower level than like electrical neurofeedback, which is a classical meaning of the term neurofeedback. It is training the blood flow systems that support the electrons and support the nerves and the neurons in the brain. So it's funny, but I think you have a fun job. We'll just put it that way.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I think you have a fun job as well doing biohack. Sounds like you.
Is there a way we can turn on chat for people? Oh, so Samuel said chat's available to everyone. Cool. So we have a Q&A session where people can do it, but I think our admins, there we go. We've got our chat set up, but it looks like only Samuel's in the chat, but there's a couple hundred other people aren't. So I think there's a setting. If we can fix it, it'd be nice because I can answer questions in chat. Meanwhile, guys, if you have questions like Tanya just did here in the Q&A, have you done tests on Mendy around its effectiveness and the placebo effect? Ben, talk to me about placebo versus like actually is the blood moving or not moving?
Yeah, so well, just to quickly define for anyone who's curious, I'm sure most people know, but the placebo effect is essentially people showing a response to nothing just because they believe that they're going to have some sort of benefit, that a benefit occurs. So, I mean, to answer this question, I'm not aware that specific tests have been done on Mendy about its effectiveness in treating certain conditions or providing improvements in certain conditions. But inherently, Mendy is measuring blood flow in the prefrontal cortex. And so I suppose there really is no such thing as a placebo effect in terms of just genuinely enhancing blood flow in the moment when you're doing a Mendy training session. If you're seeing the ball rising, that reflects that blood flow is increasing. And so, I suppose if there's the challenge is then parsing out exactly what you're doing that's causing that rise, which actually lends itself to another couple of questions that came in the chat. Dave, I don't want to move on before Dave, if you had anything to say about
I do have a comment on that. So the type of feedback that Mendy is based on is called HEG. And that stands for some Latin words that mean blood flow brain feedback. And the data on it, even with like earlier Kluge systems like the one I used, were very compelling, where you can measure, and again, the Mendy device isn't for treating ADHD. It's just if you have it and you make your brain healthier and you learn how to control your brain, your ADHD just might magically change. Shocking how that works. But what they found in studies of HEG, and I'll just say the Mendy is the best HEG device on the market, but the studies of this type of feedback show that for every session of training you do, that your, TOVA score goes up, which is a test of, do you remember what it stands for, Ben? That it's essentially a gold standard for measuring your ability to pay attention, and it's a marker of ADHD. So that's a non-placebo effect. You're basically saying, oh, you do a session, and then your measure of your attention to pay attention goes up. So this is one of those things where I haven't seen a test where they put on like a sham HEG rig on someone and just made them believe it. To answer your question real clearly, Tanya, but there's 40 years of research in this, and we know that raising blood flow does this, and we don't think that imagining you raise blood flow does it, so, because your score doesn't go up otherwise.
Right. Yeah, and I should add to that too. Moha mentioned in my introduction that I'm very kind of no BS person. I'm a scientist. I really I try to avoid doing anything or endorsing anything that's not scientifically valid. And so in the case of Mendy, there's, like Dave said, there's decades of research showing that neurofeedback, there's all sorts of different types of neurofeedback, but that neurofeedback broadly can be super useful for a variety of things, improving cognition and focus and improving mood and depression and anxiety and all sorts of things. Although, again, there are many different types of neurofeedback, Mendy specifically targets blood flow in the prefrontal cortex. And Dave, I'm actually really curious. I want to ask you this. This question keeps coming up in the chat. Basically, please explain how to use it. How do you concentrate on the moving ball? Someone said, how do you get the balls to rise? Mine is completely random. And Dave, I'm curious about your strategy. I can share mine.
All right. So this comes from, years of working with people at 40 years of Zen too, where we're teaching like advanced meditation states using neuroscience, right? And the reality is any new state for your brain that you're training, it's hard work and it's frustrating, right? So as soon as you try to make your brain do something, your brain's like, think about chocolate cake, cookies, it's too cold, it's too hot. And it's like, don't make me waste energy trying to do something I don't want to do because there could be a famine tomorrow. Don't waste electricity on getting better. So it's that inherent unattractiveness of stressing the brain that makes us turn away from it. So when you sit there and you look at the ball and like, how do I make it go up? Well, you do the thing between your ears that makes it go up. And you're like, what is that? Well, you sit there and you go, you just try stuff until you find what works. For me, again, I've trained meditation in the Himalayas, and I've gone to the Andes and done stuff with shamans. Like, I call me an advanced meditator, right? And I can do things. So I'm going to explain this from the context of an advanced meditator. If it doesn't make sense, I apologize. But you learn, if you've ever done a body scan, or if you know how to like breathe into your feet or breathe into a different part of your body, you eventually realize that there's a felt sense. It's called interoception of what's going on in my body. So you can put your attention on your belly button and take a breath. And you can do that right now, right? And you could actually, this is a more challenging, you could put your attention on the palm of your hand. With a little bit of practice, you can breathe into the palm of your hand and you can feel the palm of your hand getting bigger. Or maybe you do like Qigong, and you realize after a little while you can imagine, and soon you start feeling like a ball of energy, and you can say, well, maybe it's not there, maybe it is. You could measure it with certain things, but you're actually creating this, but it's the connection to feel it. So what I do to raise the ball is I put the Mindy on, right? And of course I'm looking at my phone and all that kind of stuff. Got it on, and then I'm looking at it, and then I take all of that energy field that I know how to feel in my body, and I put it behind the thing right behind my eyes. And when I do that, usually when I'm breathing in, and if I'm breathing in, I'll do something called an ujjayi breath, and I'll teach you that in a second. What I'm doing is I'm putting the attention right there, and the ball goes up and up and up and up and up and up and up. Now, is it because I've learned how to pay attention to the ball, or is it because I've learned how to do that thing that feels like a field that is instructing my body to move the blood flow? I'm not really sure. What I do know is if I do that, it works. But for you, you may have to imagine Eskimos. Like, I don't know. It could be anything, right? So actually, I was thinking of Eskimo pies, those old ice cream cookie things. But sometimes imagining that, I've tried playing music in my head, things like that. But that's actually an escapism thing. So if that's helpful for you, it's about putting your presence and your attention to the back of your head. And it's about feeling like crap along the way when it's not working. The frustration is what drives change. And it's okay to be like, I want to throw this thing against the wall. That probably means you're making progress.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. I mean, I remember my first few times, my first session or two, I remember thinking, how do I figure this out? It's tough. But I've now gotten to a point where I've essentially mastered it. I know exactly how to get the ball to rise, which is the process of neurofeedback. By having the information of the ball rising or not rising, it allows you to train this function. It's giving you feedback. And for me, what works is actually, when I first started, I thought, okay, I'm looking at blood flow in my prefrontal cortex. So what would I expect would increase blood flow in my prefrontal cortex? Probably like solving a complicated mathematical problem, or thinking about some challenging situation in my life. And I found that the more I like focused and thought and tried to be like hardcore cognition, it didn't really help me at all. The ball went nowhere. And especially because those states are really kind of hard to hold on to. What instead I found worked for me is just actually settling in and really trying to relax and essentially meditating. I close my eyes and I try to imagine that every breath, of course, this is a representation. This is not real. I don't know if this is real, but I try to imagine that every time I take an inhale and I have a slow, nice exhale, endogenous opioids are being released in my brain. And I'm slowly settling into this feeling of just extreme comfort and happiness and just calmness of where I am. And when I do that, it just, a lot of time I close my eyes and I just hear ding, 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 ding. And, that's how, when I get my strongest scores. And it's actually, when talking about the value of neurofeedback, part of it is like, if you go to the gym and you work out your biceps every day, your biceps are going to enlarge because you're working them out. It's just,
maybe Moha has something to offer about that part. That's just
yeah. Moha, can you demonstrate a bicep press?
Or Dave with his 7% body fat.
It's all caffeine. Anyway, keep going, Ben. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, you work out your muscles, they get bigger. This is how the brain works as well. You exercise certain functions, and I say exercise, you engage certain functions. You solve different types of problems. The parts of the brain that are engaged in those challenges are going to become stronger. And when I say stronger, I mean the synapses, the connections between brain cells are going to be strengthened and supported. And when you have more synaptic activity, you have more blood flow to feed those synapses and all that activity. Moa, okay, you're muted. So when you do neurofeedback, you're training blood flow into the frontal cortex. Probably you're training activity of those neurons, and then the blood flow is happening as a secondary effect. And so if you can just sit down and do this for 10 minutes a day, it's like, going to the gym and exercising your biceps for 10 minutes a day. You are providing activity to that brain area, an additional 10 minutes of activity than you are usually doing, which is good for the brain and strengthening that brain area. But the other thing about this is that it's also teaching you the precise method that you can use to enhance the activity of your prefrontal cortex in real time. That's there's sort of this dual effect of it's increasing the activity, and it's also training you to increase the activity. And so when you're doing it, it's really important to just focus on, trying to not get frustrated, sticking through it, identifying whatever it is that works for you, that gets the ball to rise. And, it's supposed to be challenging because we don't know how to just activate the prefrontal cortex. That's not an ability that humans are born with without having access to information about what's happening inside the brain. And Mendy provides that information about what's happening inside the brain. So it's a very kind of unnatural human process to be going through, but it's offering a tremendous amount of value because you can sort of uncover something that's not typically accessible to the human. So stick through it, don't get frustrated, and maybe try what Dave does. Maybe
I like a couple of questions, like how would a non-meditator use it? Well, sorry, if you use it, you might become a meditator just a lot more quickly than someone who's meditating. It's not the same as meditation, but it's the same as a focused generating meditation. It's just 100 times more efficient and faster. Something like Zazen, which is a Japanese samurai meditation, because samurai also have ADHD, would be the equivalent of this, where you don't have to focus for a little while, but you have to focus fully. That's what this is. So you're like, Dave, that was not an answer for a non-meditator. I'm just saying maybe your identity as a non-meditator is wrong as soon as we use Mendy for a week. But the number one thing I could say is be curious. Like, instead of like forcing the ball, like, I wonder what's making the ball move. I wonder how I feel right now. I wonder what I'm doing that makes this work. If I imagine, pirates, will that work? Sometimes people, I've heard, will imagine the ball as, inside of them moving up and down. And there's another person up here said something really, really helpful, and I'm trying to find it right now. And it was basically about feeling happy and just sort of like closing their eyes. Actually, they weren't closing their eyes, but they were just saying, I started Mendy last week. And what I noticed is when you breathe with your nose and think about a happy experience in the past or anything that would make me happy, the ball will rise up. Don't know if I'm doing the right thing. And if I yawn, the ball goes up. So yawning is probably cheating because it's moving blood flow just by eyebrows too. But the feeling happy and breathing, if that's what does it, that does it. Guess what, guys? When your brain is moving blood out of your prefrontal cortex to make it hard for you to pay attention, it's because your brain isn't feeling happy or safe or grateful. It's correlated highly with PTSD, which Moha talked about, and which I had, and I've been really open about that. I had PTSD around birth and around bullying. I was born being choked by the cord around my neck, and I did a lot of healing work on that. But if the brain learned when you were little that there's times when it's better to not look, you're not going to look no matter how much you want to. And this is what we're saying. Well, now you can do it. So if you start feeling stressed and angry, cool. There's a good reason for that. And that's why curiosity, which is the antidote for fear or distraction. Oh, what is that? What's going on there? That's how you use it if you're a non-meditator. I'm hoping that is helpful for answering the question there. Yeah, I love the conversation going on.
Yeah, we have many, many questions coming in the chat, and I feel inclined to just kind of try to answer a few of them quickly because there's so many. One, I find that flexing my muscles or tensing up my body will make the ball, whoops, sorry, not that, not thumbs up, will make the ball rise for an extended period. Is that cheating? Yes, unfortunately, that is cheating because if you're, like Dave said, if you're furrowing your brow and doing all sorts of stuff, it's going to manipulate the readout of your frontal cortex. And, it's like, when you go to the gym and you're doing an exercise, there's a lot of comparisons between brain training and muscle training. If you go to the gym and you do an exercise, but your form is absolutely terrible and you're not engaging the muscles that you're supposed to be engaging for that exercise, you're not going to see the benefits of that. In the same way, you might do something that increases the readout, like, jogging on a treadmill while you're doing your Mendy session. but that's not actually going to help you because it's not giving a legitimate readout of, self-enforced blood flow into the frontal cortex. So you would want to avoid that. I definitely, you want to be still. There was another question about should the Mendy be tight to the forehead? Definitely, you don't want it loose because if it's loose and it's not giving you consistent readouts, then that can affect your. So.
Hey Ben, I'm seeing enough questions here. It might be worth going through what is a baseline for people and why baseline matters and how you can go above 100% or below 100%, and what that really means. Do you feel comfortable walking through that?
Yeah, I mean, what do you mean by a baseline? Like the first time someone uses it, or like the calibration phase?
The calibration, I call it a baseline because that's what we're doing at 40 Years of Zen. But basically, when you first sit down, it kind of like there's a warm-up period. And if you imagine if you were to go to the gym, you're like, today I'm really strong, and you pick up, a 25-pound dumbbell and it feels light. And you're like, oh, today I'm strong. But then you go in the next day, and for whatever reason, maybe because you drank the night before, like that 20, you can't even pick it up. You're like, okay, so today my hard is 20, but tomorrow my hard is 30. Well, what is easy or hard for moving blood flow to the brain? How much is in there right now? So we need to know how much did you improve in this session, right? Versus how much did you improve versus another session. So maybe walk them through that and what the neural scores mean. I think that could be helpful.
That's a great question, and thank you for saying that. Yeah, exactly. So if you wake up first thing in the morning and you do your Mendy session, and then you look at your raw scores of blood flow during that session versus, let's say, you do it at 2 p.m. right after you had a fresh cup of coffee and you just went for a jog outside. Your scores and the amount of blood flow that you're seeing just sitting there are going to be probably very different because your brain activity at that point in the day is very different. So that's why this calibration occurs, where when you first turn it on, you start your session, it shows this brain kind of like getting filled with fluid, and it says calibrating. It's recording the level of blood flow in your frontal cortex at that moment, which it uses as a baseline. And then when you do your session and you see an increase in whatever 50% or whatever it is, it's measuring that increase from that calibration period that occurred. And I'm really glad you brought this up, Dave, because whenever I do my sessions, I try to make sure that during that calibration period, I'm not already starting my neurofeedback process. I'm trying to be distracted. I'll be like looking at something, on the wall. I'm like, oh, I gotta touch up that spot of paint or something, like trying to be completely like not engaged so that it's getting a legitimate readout of whatever my brain was doing before I sat down and engaged with the training session. So when you see an increase of 75% or whatever, it's relative to that initial moment. Do you do that, Dave, or no?
I agree that if you do that, you'll have a higher score in an easier session, but you might be kind of punking out, right? So if you start like, I'm going to be averagely, it's sort of like, what do you want the starting weight? If you're going to pick up something heavy, what do you want it to be? If you want it to be a lighter starting weight, then you're like, just kind of do nothing and see where your blood is versus like, I'm testing it. And if, you're testing, you're going to get a different result. And I'm seeing a question here that I want to address, because it's really cool and it's all medical and stuff like that. So again, Mendy is not a medical device. It is a brain performance device. And this is really important. So if you're working with doctors and all that stuff on these things, you need to go talk to whoever and make sure that it's safe, because who knows what else you're doing. But this is someone who says you've read about the benefits of HEG for ADHD, but what about things that are neurodivergent like ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder, and sensory processing disorder? Guys, to be super clear, I have had all of these. I was diagnosed with all of them, and we've gotten rid of 99% of that stuff. It is absolutely doable. But the underlying thing here, and I think it's really important, is what is the beginning age when you can do this? I don't know what Mendy's official answer to that is. I know with HEG feedback, they've done that on really young kids in autistic situations. And I've spoken at autism conferences because I was able to reverse my Asperger's. But I don't know. How young would you go? Oh, you're muted.
Are you asking me how young I would
go? Yeah.
We've got Mendy users as young as 5. We've got users as young as 4 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
That's the youngest I know of that are using it.
There's a certain point where if a 4 or 5-year-old is having a hard time just paying attention, go for it. If they're doing what a 4 or 5-year-old is supposed to do, like, you're not supposed to pay that much attention. You're almost entirely in like a dreamy theta state. You're daydreaming all day long, and you should be like picking your nose and making, you know, mud puppets or something. So what you don't want to do is force a child to overtrain their prefrontal cortex before they're ready or necessary. So if, like, you know, you will do 2 hours of Mendy they probably don't need that at that time. If the PFC comes online as you grow, and it finishes baking when you're about 24 or 25. So I would be super happy to start if a child has any of those disorders, and it was my child, I'd be like, well, it's unlikely that playing, you know, brain video games that improve brain performance are going to be harmful. In fact, there's no data indicating it could be harmful in any way. So the worst it would do is nothing. So I'm going to try and see if it works. But I feel very comfortable with that. I've had my kids doing various types of feedback since they were 5 years old, including heart rate variability, neurofeedback, the 40 years of Zen stuff. And Mendy now. They're getting paid for it, but they're teenagers because I didn't have Mendy a long time ago. So
how awesome. Tim in the chat said my 8-year-old loves it. It's the only time I see him sit still for 10 minutes. That's awesome. Like, that's amazing to hear. And I'd be curious, Tim, if you see this or hear this, to follow up on that. I'd love to know whether from when your son started Mendy to now, if he finds more ease with sitting down and focusing for 10 minutes, because, you know, that's sort of one of the goals, that it would enhance focus and discipline. And I want to point out another comment in the chat. Someone said, I'm at 332 days of constant and consistent training now. Very good for you. And my scores are changing almost on a weekly basis. Don't think about the score. There's so many different inputs and contexts that affect you. Just keep on training and look for improvements in your behavior. I totally echo that. I think the score is a really useful way to look at, okay, how did I do this time? You know, did I succeed? You could set kind of goals for yourself, but absolutely the more important thing is, you know, are you finding that you're seeing ease in your life elsewhere? Are your sessions becoming easier? You know, is the ball rising at more controllably versus looking at a specific score, like a specific number at the end of the day?
yeah, it almost doesn't matter. Just make it go up as much as you can. Some days you go to the gym and you can add a plate, and some days you go to the gym and your max from the last workout was higher than this one, but you still benefited from going to the gym. Over time, the line will be up and to the right. And others are asking, well, how do I know that I'm turning the ball on in real life? Well, you don't. But if you, and I keep talking about gyms, I don't even use the gym. I have my company Upgrade Labs is like replacing the gym with AI because it takes less time. But we'll just use that analogy because it's old fashioned and we all know about it. If you did a bunch of squats in the gyms, you know, to get like strong butt muscles and quads, right? And then you go skiing. Like, well, how do I know when I'm skiing that I'm engaging my squat muscles? Well, you don't have to know because the body has the muscles and it uses them when it needs them. So when you're paying attention because you've done your Mendy training, it's just easy to pay attention. And if you didn't do your Mendy training, it was really hard to pay attention, and you probably thought about, you know, whatever you like to think about instead of whatever you wanted to think about. It's that kind of straightforward.
Yeah. Sort of unrelated to this, but I just saw another question. I'm kind of like, I'm trying to follow. I have the questions over here, so if you see me looking this way a lot, I'm trying to keep track of them. Thomas Cubby said, sound, no sound, can it be more of a distraction? And someone else I saw before said that they like to close their eyes. Like I said, I like to close my eyes. I like to use the sound. I think sometimes it can be a distraction depending on your sort of the way you think. But there are some studies that show that like having sound and a visual cue at the same time can be beneficial, which is why Mendy does have both. But yeah, you don't have to necessarily have the sound or or look at the ball. You can have one or the other if you don't want both, if you find them distracting. But the idea of having them both there is to provide you with as much information so that you can use it however you want. I'm looking at.
Hey, I was just looking up your Instagram. You are, I'm going to type it here for you. You're at Dr. Breen, right? Like that. Is it Brain or Brain? BREIN.
It's supposed to be Brain, but it's an E. It's a play on word. My name is
okay.
Ron, and I'm a neuroscientist, so I went with the.
I like it. I tried doing it with my last name, but it just spelled ass spray, so I couldn't do that. That was my 7th grade trauma. There you go. All the bullies. But guys, if you want to follow Ben's work on Instagram, totally do that. His name is right there in the chat, and I put mine up there as well, because he shares a lot of good stuff about neuroscience. There's so much that gets unlocked, and the reason I'm just a supporter of Mendy, I have lots of companies and lots of things that I do. I just know everything that I write, all of my books, all my podcasts, if I'd have just known this when I was 16 or 19, I wouldn't have weighed 300 pounds. I wouldn't have been such an asshole. I wouldn't have had all the trauma. I wouldn't have been so tired all the time. I would have been able to pay attention. I wouldn't have had a behavior file this thick in high school. Like all that stuff, it's all changeable. And so I just write everything for myself when I was going back then, like the knowledge we need as humans. And if I'd have had a Mendy in probably about really 6th grade, when I really could not do any of this stuff, I think it would have radically transformed the trajectory of my life. I have a great life, right? But I've also had a lot of suffering, to be perfectly honest, physical and mental, emotional, and it's all changeable, it's all improvable. But I would have liked to have an easier path. And Mendy, I think, is just an incredible gift for anyone. If you feel like you're pushing all the time and you can't pay attention, well, train your brain to pay attention. It's an organ. You can train yourself to have a bigger butt. You can train yourself to have more focus. It's the same thing. It's just not that hard.
Yeah, I'm noticing in the chat that a lot of the questions are about, what should I do to concentrate on the ball? And I hope we address that. Personally, if I were you and you're not sure, I would recommend doing, this sort of meditation approach. I think that's always a win-win. And then if it doesn't work for you, then you still got a meditation session out of it, which is good. There's someone said, can you do other things while you use the Mendy to see the effects that different activities have on the prefrontal cortex? Of course, you are welcome to do that. If you'd like to know for your own personal gain, what happens, which things improve prefrontal cortex blood flow in my brain. But that's not really the goal. The goal is to do the neurofeedback training sessions and to really use it as a training tool.
I kind of like the idea. Maybe we can convince Moha. It would be fun to have it running like for all day until the battery ran out, and just have a graph of my attention. And then I could say, oh, that's funny. Every time I have a meeting with accounting and human resources, like my attention goes away. Or maybe every time I use Instagram, my attention goes away, right? Yeah. So this would be really interesting, but it would be a different use of the device than it's set up for today.
It would be really cool to enable a mode where it's just like measurement mode, and it would just kind of spit out like not even a normalized, but just a raw value that you could just document in the app, and then you could compare that to other things you're doing. But I also love your idea, Dave, of just leaving it on and tracking throughout the day. That's really interesting.
In fact, years ago, I was the CTO and co-founder of the first company that could measure heart rate from your wrist. So what your Fitbit does today, or a Whoop. And my whole goal with that is I want to be able to measure this, not to count your number of steps, which doesn't even matter, according to like where that number came from. But I just want to know what my heart rate's doing and what my stress levels are all day long, because we don't have a good connection there. Likewise, I would love to know what is the blood in the front of my brain doing. And the reality is, knowing isn't that valuable at the end of the day. What is valuable is teaching your body how to change it automatically. And it's been life-changing for me. I mean, it can be frustrating, especially if you have a brain like mine at the beginning. Like, this is hard work, right? And it's frustrating. Like, the damn ball won't move and you just don't know what to do. And then as soon as that happens, it's actually your ego, but your nervous system will feed you all sorts of nonsense to tell you how hard it is and how much it sucks and how stupid Dave is for recommending this, and all this stuff. And it's all just internal resistance to change. And it's not your resistance, it's your body's resistance to change. It's just making up stories for you. And at this point, I've spent 5 days with, either me or my team have spent 5 days with more than 1,000 high performing people. Like, there's a $16,000 5-day brain upgrade thing at 40 Years of Zen. Do you know how many CEOs of $500 million companies have that same thing going on all the time? pretty much all of them, right? So I'm just saying, if you feel the resistance, it's normal and healthy, and it's just part of having a human body. So don't worry about it. It's not like everyone else. It's just I put it on and magically the ball always rises. No, we all had to struggle in some way, and the more you have to struggle, probably the more you need it. So celebrate the struggle and be curious about it, and then that makes the pain go away.
Yeah, sorry, Dave, you keep going on these fantastic explanations, and then I keep turning it over to the chat, which I'm sorry for.
No, it's totally good. I'm reading the chat too.
Okay, good. Yeah, I just keep seeing these questions, and I want to make sure everyone has, or as many people as possible, have their questions answered. There are two questions that kind of go together. One said, is it training blood flow or is it training brain activation, which increases blood flow? And the other one's a little bit more complicated. I'm going to answer that first one about blood flow versus brain activity. It's essentially training both, but the primary thing that you're training is brain activation. So there's a few different ways of doing neurofeedback. You could do EEG, which measures electrical signals, and that's going to give you an immediate readout of the synaptic activity of your brain cells, because they're interacting and there's all this complex stuff happening where ion channels are opening and then cells are becoming more active and so on. So this is all happening like in real time, which you can measure through EEG. FNIRS, it measures blood flow, which is occurring sort of after the fact. There's like a time course of the activity happens, and then since the cells are being activated, they're demanding more glucose, more sugar, and more oxygen, and so they need more of this stuff. So the body responds and says, okay, you got it. Here's more of all of those nutrients you need. And so that's what Mendy is measuring, is that subsequent blood flow. So are you training blood flow or brain activation? You're training both. They can be separated in the brain, I suppose, but in this case, you're learning to turn on the prefrontal cortex, which then drives more blood flow to that area. And there's another interesting question that I haven't read in its entirety, but I'm going to read it now. Maybe I'll pose this to Dave.
Yeah.
Then you can handle it, Dave. Does the brain create neural connections between thoughts during the sessions and scores, like thinking of God and using those thoughts as a trigger during the day to increase blood flow? And B, if I'm sad during training, does the brain think that it's only meant to increase blood flow only in sad states, or seeing sadness as a necessity for a deliberate increase? So what this question's asking is, can you sort of create cues or thoughts that you link within your sessions to that activity that can be used as sort of a trigger? What do you think about that, Dave?
Well, think of this like Pavlov's dog. You might remember that from like 7th grade psychology. Like, you ring a bell and then you give the dogs food. After a while, you just ring the bell and the dogs drool because they're expecting food. I haven't seen any evidence in studies I've read or in my own use of this that the body would correlate those states. This is a pretty intentional state. And it's not one that's pushing your primordial buttons. The things that motivate humans in psychology are a feeling of safety, food, sex, power, and avoiding pain, which is the same as safety from your cell's perspective. So the fact that you're doing this relatively complex behavior, I don't think is going to trigger something like that. It'd be almost like if I'm sad when I play chess, I'm going to be sad. Like it doesn't work like that. I think they're separate. Moha, do you have anything there?
Well, I know that you need to take off soon, so I'm going to stay with Ben. Thank you so much, Dave. This has been amazing. There is a code called Unveil20. Dave, I am so happy and so proud to have your support and to have your expertise. I'm sorry. So I'm actually in Mexico right now. And the reason I've been moving around is because my internet has been terrible. So I've had to move like 5 different rooms, if you guys haven't noticed. And I seem to have settled into a good spot. So me and Ben can stay for the next 15 minutes. Dave, could you please give us like just some final words? Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Of course. As I said a little bit earlier, I don't have to be on this call. I don't have to be supporting Mendy. It's not necessary for me to put food on the table. I'm investing my time and my energy here with you today because I think it's worthy. And I do that on my podcast. Like I only write books I think are worth your time to read, but I'm very conscious in how I allocate my time and my energy. And I think that this category of brain training, this HEG based feedback or HEG based neurofeedback. I'm not sure if that's what you call it. Technically, that's what it is. It's underrepresented. It's entirely different than EEG. There's companies like Muse or whatever all over the place. It's just not the same. And in the same day, you could say, I'm going to train my focus, and then I'm going to train the electrical signaling, right? So it's like Mendy is a missing piece for so many people. And it's something you can do at home. It's easy. It's the thing that drives me actually kind of crazy as an entrepreneur is it's super well packaged. Like the thing bends, it lights up. It's kind of idiot proof. So it's just put it on and use it, and you can use it on a kid. It doesn't require wires and electrodes and stuff. So I'm like, this lets people not fail in school. It lets people get raises. It lets people feel less shame and struggle because you tried to do something, you put all of your willpower and your effort into it, and it didn't work. And it's because hard work doesn't make you pay attention. In fact, sometimes it's the opposite of paying attention. So I want to make things easier. Everything I teach is about how do I make it easier and less work for you? Because I think you'll put the extra work into being a better parent or a better whatever you want to be. So that's why I'm here. And that's why truly give Mendy a try, use it on your kids, give it to people you don't like. Maybe you'll like them. That's just a good strategy, but it is the holidays. So there you go, guys. Thank you so much. Be sure to follow Ben on Instagram. Be sure to follow me, follow Moha, follow Mendy if you're not. And if you don't have a Mendy, you're crazy right now. This is a really good, very, very powerful technology that's not very expensive compared to some of the other stuff that you'll see out there that doesn't even work as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dave. Yeah. Unveil 20 is the discount for everybody that attended. And me and Ben are actually going to answer a few more questions. Thank you, Dave.
All right. I'm going to type in one more thing for you guys here. Just the Human Upgrade is the name of my show. I'll be hanging up in 1 second. You guys keep going.
The Human Upgrade, guys. Great podcast.
And so there's an interesting question in the chat. There's a lot of interesting questions. So kudos to the audience. You have fantastic inquiries. Someone said, sometimes I wonder if I'm only working one muscle group, as opposed to the whole brain, like going to the gym just for big biceps. Is this what the Mendy does, or is it more integrative and comprehensive than that? So it's a great question. And the truth is, yes, you are training one brain area, the prefrontal cortex, but it's a very important brain area to be training. And the reason for that is the prefrontal cortex is, I like to describe it as the babysitter of the brain. It's very well connected with other brain areas, and it has a lot of control over other areas. So it's kind of like if you think about, you have these very impulsive, reactive areas of the brain, like the amygdala, for example. You see something that's maybe kind of alarming, like a shadow in the dark, and your brain is it's wired to freak out because it's useful for you to be aware of things like that scare you. But sometimes those things happen in inappropriate contexts where you get really afraid or really alarmed or really aggravated over something that's not really healthy to be alarmed or aggravated for. And the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that does something called top-down control, where it can modulate the activity of those other brain areas and turn a very impulsive emotional reaction to something into a very carefully thought out, high cognitive process of being like, actually, that's not a person, that's just a shadow, or maybe I shouldn't be reacting with strong emotions to this person in my workplace because I'm in my workplace, things like that. So by training the prefrontal cortex, you are restricting the training to this one brain area, but it has all these downstream benefits of the other areas that are going to be theoretically increased in their function, or sorry, I should say the control that your prefrontal cortex will be able to exert over those other brain areas, which could have other downstream effects. So let's see. There are a lot of questions coming through. Let me see. Okay, someone said, is there a benefit to using Mendy multiple times per day, or is there a point where you could possibly overtrain? Another fantastic question, and it's good that you're thinking about this. So there are, like I said, 40 years of scientific research on neurofeedback training, but there's really no clear consensus of like, okay, you should do this strategy if you want to have this effect or things like that. It's not really parsed out to that level. Just that study hasn't really been done yet. So the question here is like, how much should I use it? Is there too much? My recommendation, based on kind of just what I've read in the literature, is to use the more the merrier. Essentially, the more you use it, the better it is. If you can certainly underuse it. If you do it for 5 minutes a week, the likelihood of you seeing any benefits is going to be extremely low, because just like if you went to the gym for 5 minutes a week, is that really going to do anything for you? Maybe a tiny bit, but not that you're going to see measurable benefits. Using it multiple times per day, I would say that this is where it differs from the gym, and that if you go to the gym 3 times a day and you work out, you can legitimately overexert yourself and tire your muscles and maybe get an injury. I wouldn't say that using Mendy 3 times a day would be like harmful for you in the same type of way, but I just don't. I would imagine that at some point you do overtrain, you reach that sort of threshold for benefits. I personally, if you have the time for it, 1 session a day for as long as you'd like to do, I think is perfectly sufficient. You can certainly try to do more, and if you want to, that's great. I would only say that I would recommend that if it's actually a pleasant experience for you, that you use it as sort of a meditation or a way to ground yourself throughout the day. In that case, then if it's providing more value beyond the neurofeedback itself, but the actual experience is valuable, then certainly do it as much as you'd like. But as far as seeing benefits, again, the answer is unclear, but I would say 3 times a day is probably more than you could use, or more than you would need to use.
And I think I found an interesting one here. I've done extensive studies with Bruce Lipton on epigenetics. I don't know if you see that one. I think that'd be an interesting one for you to answer. In working with Joe Dispenza, I've been able to get the results that you're speaking of. I'm not versed in this, and I'm asking you if these results that you're speaking of could be achieved with meditation alone. That an interesting one you want to take a stab at?
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that question. So first, epigenetics is interesting. I've studied epigenetics in my research. It's the process of the expression of different genes changing based on your experience. So I don't know if it's worth going into that as a whole. Like, I could describe epigenetics for 20 minutes. And whether or not epigenetic effects are involved in neurofeedback, I have no idea. I'm sure there's a way to tie that together, but not that I know of specifically. But the end of that question was, Moa, can you remind me? I don't have it in front of me. What was the last sentence of that question?
I moved on because I was going to look for the other question, but I'm not versed in this, but I'm asking you if these results that you're speaking of could be achieved with meditation alone.
Okay, thank you. There we go. Thank you very much. Yeah, so the question is essentially, if you're just doing meditation versus doing neurofeedback with Mendy, is there a difference? Yes. If you are, this is the example I always give. If I tell you right now to turn on your prefrontal cortex and you sit back and you try to do it, are you doing it? Who knows? That you literally have no way of knowing this, but neurofeedback provides you directly the feedback. So by giving you that added information, it allows you to gain more from an individual session, because you're going to actually know whether what you're doing is having an impact on your brain activity, specifically your prefrontal cortex activity. Meditation alone is an extremely effective tool that's been shown to be useful in a variety of applications, depression, anxiety, all sorts of things. Meditation is fantastic. Mendy is sort of parallel to meditation. There's a component, there may be a meditation component in neurofeedback for you, depending on if you use meditation. But neurofeedback enhances that to the level of, beyond just feeling like, okay, yes, I do feel better after this meditation session. It's also giving you a direct readout that your prefrontal cortex activity is increasing, which is not necessarily the goal of meditation, but it's an entirely separate thing, neurofeedback, which is training not only prefrontal cortex activity and function, but also training your ability to regulate neurofeedback training, or your ability to train and regulate the prefrontal cortex and its activity. So they are distinct but overlapping, and they each have their own uses and value.
Thank you for that. There's a question here that says, it's from George McIntyre, that says, for some reason, a lot of the time when I get the ball going up, as it approaches the line, it stops. And it's like I get anxiety about approaching the line, and it negatively impacts my Mendy performance. How can I overcome this? I want to jump on this one just because this is something that I've always struggled with. So anytime I'm actually about to reach the line and I'm about to get like a new peak, like a new high score, I'll just literally, I'll be like, I'm not going to stress about it. I'm not going to worry about it. And then what I've done is I've actually just taught myself to kind of like melt into the ball and just try to push it out. For me, just so you know, it took many, many, many months. So it's not uncommon, but basically what it comes down to is you just want to do less. It's very easy to tell somebody to relax. Relaxing is not that easy. But basically you just want to learn how to focus and just kind of blend into it and do less. That's kind of how I do it myself though.
Yeah, I think the more that you try, like I said before, my first time I did it, I was trying to focus. I thought that's how it would work, but that's not what worked for me. And when you get to that point, something happens in your brain where you become aware of that threshold that you're coming up to, and you start to think, okay, I need to deliver right in this moment. And that pressure can, if the pressure changes your perception of the world around you, then it's absolutely changing something in your brain, because your brain is driving that perception of the world. So yeah, I mean, like Moha said, try not to worry or panic or let it influence you. That's actually personally one of the reasons why I like to close my eyes when I do it and just rely on the sounds, because if I kind of feed into it too much and look at the graphics, and I don't know, like I'm not as good as Moha is a very experienced user. I'm not as good as Moha is at it, so I can't really kind of blend in like he does. But maybe trying to reduce the number of distractions that you might experience by just focusing on one cue or the other could be useful. But again, there is research that maybe both together is the best thing.
I'm actually very experienced, but I'm not very good. I'm one of those people that will have lower scores. I mean, there's people that will just off the bat get better scores just because their brains are built that way. Here's one from Thomas Cubby. It says, sound or no sound? Can it be more of a distraction? For me, that's an interesting one because Ben, you've mentioned closing your eyes and getting better scores a couple of times. And I don't know how much time you've got, Ben, but I've got a little bit of time if you want to hang out a little bit more and just just try to kill a few more of these. But for me, it's one of those things where I need the sound and I need my eyes open. If I close my eyes, it just dies on me. I have a friend of mine, Naveen Tukaram, who's actually a Mendy investor, who's a very experienced meditator. This guy, we went out to a very loud restaurant in Stockholm, and his scores were off the chain. Like he just had great scores. I did it. Obviously, there's nothing happening. Like I just need full focus. And, for me, it's sound. And even the thing that you mentioned a couple of times, closing my eyes, for me, it just really throws me off. I need to be completely honed in every single way. I don't know if you want to add something to that or jump on another question. I want to kill as many of these as I can.
Earlier, someone in the chat said, Dave, you should do a session right now. And Dave said, no, I can't because I can't talk while I do it. And they said, oh, you should have Ben do a session and you can narrate through it. And I read it and I didn't say a word because I'm like, if I try to do it right now, I'm going to look like a huge fraud with everybody watching. There's 250 people. I guarantee that ball's going nowhere. And then I'm just going to, I don't want to do that. I think,
that sounds like a fun experiment. I don't know, man. If you ask me again, I might say yes, and I'll do it now that I've got stable internet here. So I apologize for not being very useful the first hour of this conversation. Let me see. Okay, I've been using Mendy since April. I saw my scores improve, but I can't feel the difference in my behavior or my mood. What should I do? It says, why should I do? Okay, that's an interesting one. I will tell you, so for me as a user, my emotional regulation just dramatically got better. For me, I had very bad nightmares, and my nightmares got better. It went from waking up 4 or 5 times a day to literally having a nightmare once, twice a week, to now I barely ever have nightmares. I have very bad PTSD from my time in Libya. I'm from Costa Rica, but I was there during the war, and I had bad PTSD from a lot of stuff in childhood, and I've always had very bad emotional regulation issues. So for me, I could see a very drastic change very, very quickly. As far as emotional regulation, I had a girlfriend at the time, an ex-girlfriend that said to me, why are you so nice, within like 3 weeks? And I remember saying to her, like, several people have said this to me, that I'm nicer. I just feel good. Like, how bad was I? Like, am I the most horrible person in the world that everybody's asking me why I'm so nice? And basically it just comes down to, I just felt better, and feeling better makes you nicer. Now, there are some people that will use Mendy and they won't notice those big differences. I'm going to give the mediocre Costa Rican, horribly bad science student answer. And then you give us the scientific Stanford neuroscientist answer. But for me, the way that I look at it is, the more messed up your brain is, the more drastic the effects are. And I've kind of like sampled this with a lot of people around me. And I know this is going to raise some eyebrows the way that I do it, but this is kind of like the way I look at it is kind of like, the more you desperately need help, the more you're going to notice the changes. Whereas somebody that is like, quote unquote, in great shape is not going to see these super dramatic differences. Like, let's take it like, if somebody is 700 pounds, and they start, taking a walk every day, start jogging, they're going to lose 100 pounds. But somebody like me is never going to lose such a huge percentage, or somebody like Dave, who's at 7% body fat. I saw him in Dubai. I bumped, about a month ago. I mean, the guy is insanely ripped. You've seen how ripped he is. Like, obviously there's not that much room for improvement. Whereas somebody like me, I would be the 700-pound person in this example. There was a lot of room for improvement. That's my answer to this question. What is yours, Ben?
No, that's a very good answer, Moha. And I mean,
Really? I thought you were going to destroy me, by the way.
The Costa Rican failed science student and the Stanford neuroscience, the answer is a line. It's true. There's a lot of evidence for this in so many different contexts. I mean, for example, if you have someone who is suffering from depression and someone who's not suffering from depression, and you give them both SSRIs or some other treatment, you have them both start meditating, any treatment for depression, and you look at how their mood scores change, you're going to see a much more drastic change in the person with depression. And, and if you look at the studies on neurofeedback, even, it's the same thing. If you look at, how many people, or what the percentage of people who show cognitive performance improvements after doing neurofeedback, same thing. Those who have, cognitive impairment or a brain injury or something like that, they show the most dramatic results. So it's absolutely the truth. And, I can say that I've experienced this myself as well as a scientist in my experiments. Many times we're looking at some condition. A lot of my research was on autism in animal models of autism. And we do some sort of manipulation in some brain circuitry, and we're looking at whether it increases the social behavior in these, let's say, a mouse model of autism. And we see that it has this robust influence on the autism model mouse, but in the mice that don't have that gene mutation, there's absolutely no difference. And it raises a lot of questions, because it's like, well, how engaged is this brain area really if it has no difference in outside of the context of autism? But that's just the way that science understands things to work. It's much easier to take things from, a below average or below standard to the standard than to going from standard to above standard. It's just the way the brain works.
I love that. I love it. There you go.
I appreciate your comments.
From the scientist's mouth.
About epigenetics. Tanya said,
you want to pick one, or should I pull one out? How does Mendy help my executive function? I think you and Dave touched up on that. Do we skip that one? Okay. Sorry about that. If I'm talking, the ball won't move, right? Oh, that was Dave writing people that were trying to get him to, oh my God, Dave was typing while doing this. He's a superhero.
I know.
I can barely do one thing poorly. All right. You want to pick one? Ben, let's get a couple more. And whenever you need to go, we'll wrap it up.
Okay. Someone said, can this be used with a cochlear implant? To be honest, I feel obligated to answer this question because it was directed to me. I don't actually know. First impression, I don't see why not. I mean, I don't know if you know anything about this, Moa.
What was that? I didn't hear the question when you read it.
It's the most recent question. Can this be used with a cochlear implant in someone's ear?
I have no idea.
I would imagine that they're, I don't know. Again, I don't want to make something up, but I am making something up. My gut tells me I think it should be okay.
Yeah. Are there any contraindications for using Mendy? We've already touched up on that, but what he's talking about is the impact on headaches or stroke.
Contraindications.
And could it be helpful for people with dementia, by the way? That's what it says.
My dog is always here to join.
I know, that's a very cute dog. It distracted me. Can increased blood flow impact headaches, stroke, and could it be helpful for people with early dementia? That's a beautiful dog.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not as well versed in the dementia neurofeedback literature. I would imagine, like, given the context of the conversation we just had about showing improvements from a deficit versus without a deficit, I would imagine that in the context of dementia, there's a deficit, so you would be more likely to see improvements. It certainly seems like the kind of thing that absolutely can't hurt. And this also goes back to the contraindications question. It's important to note that Mendy is not, it's not stimulating your brain. It's not sending any signals in. It's simply recording. So if you're worried with like a cochlear implant that it's going to, I don't know, like an MRI might be magnetic and pull it out. This is not that type of thing. It's not going to change your brain in any way. The way that it changes your brain is by giving you the information to use as feedback for your training. So you're the one doing the modification of your brain. And so I'm not aware of any contraindications that you could, that you'd be worried about.
Great answer. When should you increase the time of a session? What's that?
There's a question that I don't know the answer to. Maybe you. Is it recommended to charge 80% or higher, or did I dream that?
Is it recommended to charge?
To keep it charged 80% or higher, or did I dream that? They said. To
charge the device at 80% or higher?
Yeah, does it work best above 80% or something, or is that not true?
No, it works just fine. I did a session today at like 15%. It was just fine.
Anecdotally, I find the same, that it works just fine no matter what the charge is.
Yeah. When should you increase the time to do a session? For me, this is a lot. It's like endurance. It's like if you're going to run a 5K, you don't just start running a 5K if you're terribly out of shape. You have to build up for it. For me, even now, I rarely ever will do 15-minute sessions. I think 10 for me is like I literally will get fatigued. I don't think I have a stellar, I don't have like a super brain. I'm not like this super, you understand, like I have my limitations. They're very, very glaring. They're very obvious. And what I have done is I have improved myself a lot, but I don't think you could put me in a test with a bunch of like super competent people that are great at a lot of tasks where I would be, whether it's, even assembling IKEA furniture, like there's some stuff that I just suck at, where it's like, well, I'm better and I can handle the stress of it better. And I can kind of like, now I can focus and I can get things done that are very basic. But the example that I like to put there is you don't go from being the worst swimmer in the world to being Michael Phelps, but you can go from being the worst swimmer in the world to being a decent swimmer. And that's kind of like how I look at it. When it comes to the building that resilience, building that strength, that stuff is going to make you be able to cope with the stress of work, that stress of everyday life, that stress of being in your relationship when things are tough. But it doesn't mean that there is like a standard thing. I really think that what you should do is you should strive to have longer sessions. I many times do 3-minute sessions. 5-minute sessions would be kind of like my average, and I do the 10-minute sessions because I literally have to work at them even today. And I've been doing Mendy for almost 4 years. Like I still have to work on getting the 10-minute sessions done because I'm just not built like that. Some people are marathon runners, some people are sprinters. I like to think that I'm a sprinter. That's my answer. I don't know if you've got an answer or something to add there, Ben.
That's a great answer, and I couldn't agree more with you about building IKEA furniture. I absolutely despise it. My wife makes fun of me all the time. But yeah, I agree. I think that when doing neurofeedback training, it's training. You are intending to become better and stronger and improve your performance over time. So there's a few ways that you can sort of set your goals on that. And one way is to say, okay, I'm going to do a 3-minute session today. My goal is in 2 months, I'm doing 5-minute sessions. In another 2 months, I want to be doing 10-minute sessions. Or you can make it that, I want my percent change to go from 5% this session. I'm hoping that in 2 months it'll be 30%. But also important to point out that when you're first starting out and you're actually learning the basics of what works for you and what doesn't, a longer session gives you more time to explore that. So if you're doing a 3-minute session and you're never getting the ball to move, it might be worth trying a 5 or a 10-minute session just to explore a couple different things and see. And it's okay if you do a 10-minute session and nothing works for you. It's like in the beginning, it's about that process of figuring it out. And then once you've identified that, it's about learning to engage that and make it happen for as much of a session as you can, whether that's 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever you want.
Beautiful. I'm literally just, guys, I'm sorry. You can write me these and we'll send you answers to these. We'll get somebody on the team to answer all your questions. I'm just randomly grabbing questions. How is the Mendy different from the Muse? So Muse is another company that's been around for a long time. They do this EEG device. It's a different technology. They do electroencephalography. I like them. I like what they do. I'm one of those people, you'll never hear me speak badly about anybody. I think there is a use for that. It'll get you into a different state. It's brainwaves. So basically it's brainwaves through the scalp. What Mendy does is it teaches you how to control your prefrontal cortex. So it's an active training. It's not passive. I would say our closest competitor would be the treadmill. I always like to say that. It's kind of like, if you're going to kind of visualize what Mendy is, it would be more like gym equipment. Like that's basically what it is. You're teaching yourself to make your brain stronger, which is very different. And the technology, like Dave Asprey explained, is hemoencephalography, which is HEG, H-E-G. I don't know if you want to add on that or if you want to jump on a different one.
No, that's I think you did great. It's, yeah, the main difference is that it's EEG measurement versus FNIRS. They're different things. Like you explained, EEG is like oscillations and electrical signals, where FNIRS measures blood flow. And it's someone said in the chat, Mendy has increased my Muse scores, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because Mendy actually improves the aura scores. Like because it will benefit the way that your brain works. So it will actually translate into the readings that these other wearables will have. Tim Doobie, I hope I pronounced that right, says his teacher has shared that he has improved focus following instructions and seems less distracted. I must have missed half of that first. Well, that's good news, but I must have missed half of that first one. Ed Dobrensky, I'm so thankful for the Mendy device. It has helped me so much. I have been using it for 3 months now, and it has made a big difference in my anxiety and stress response. Ed, that is so great to hear. Anxiety is a huge one for me. I've always been a very anxious person with really bad emotional regulation. So my anxiety will usually just lead me to it turns into rage. I think it's a very common thing for a lot of people. And I have just, if I was to say one thing if I were to pick one thing about Mendy, I think that's a hard one. I'd actually have to pick two. I think it'd have to be the nightmares, but also just the emotional regulation. It's basically not getting frustrated and snapping. I don't know if there's something that you want to add there. Here's a very scientific one. Dr. Tato Soskadze has published several studies with our equipment showing benefits for autism. I don't even know. I think some of these I'm moving fast and I'm missing like the first half of them. So sorry about that. I have been using Mendy. You're not following me. You can't see my screen, right, Ben?
No, I can't see your screen.
All right. I've been using Mendy late at night for the last 2 weeks, and I consistently sit around at around 6%. Is there a score that is so low that you would recommend getting further help from medical avenues?
I mean,
oxygenated blood flow.
I see. Well, look, if you're getting a score of 6%, it means you're increasing 6% from your baseline, not that you're 6%.
You only have 6%. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a very important distinction. I would say, I mean, if you're concerned, if you have a concern about your brain health, then sure, of course, you should see a neurologist or your primary doctor. But in this case, it sounds like maybe there's additional training to be done in figuring out exactly what it is that works for you, and then learning to harness that sticking with it, like the conversation Dave and I were having earlier about not getting frustrated, sticking with it, trying to identify those things, and I guess focusing on not focusing in a way is a great place to start. And again, like I said earlier, if you're having trouble figuring out what works for you, do a 5 or 10 minute session and just try to relax as much as you can and see if that works for you. If it doesn't work for you, absolutely no loss. You spent 5 minutes relaxing. If it does work for you, congratulations. You just helped yourself identify what type of neurofeedback approach works for you.
And I'm going to jump in. Actually, 2 weeks for a lot of people like me is not a long amount of time. I've been doing this for years. Like for some people they improve slowly and learn slowly. I'm really complimenting myself here, but I'm too honest. All right. Do you want to pick one out, or do you want to just keep going? Do you want to, we stop whenever you need to get back to work?
Yeah, let's do 1 or 2 more. I'm catching up a little bit.
There's somebody saying, Dave, your books and your podcasts have helped me since 2016. So that's very nice of him to say.
This is pretty interesting. It's an interesting question. I'm not sure I have much to say about it. You might. I noticed that days I have gone to the gym, I get much better scores. Is that so for all people? Do you see that, Moha? I mean, I know there's, I don't know if there's any days you don't go to the gym. If you can compare.
There aren't. I go to the gym every day. But I train every day. So that, I mean, when he says, or she, is it he or she? Does it say the name? So they say that their scores on the days that they go to the gym are better. What I would have to ask is it before you go to the gym or after you go to the gym? For me, like, you have to understand that I fast every day, so I only eat at night. I'm actually in the middle of a 72-hour fast. I flew back from Vancouver on Monday. I'm in Mexico, and I'm going to be having marrow-bone tacos tomorrow night. So I'm not eating today. I've been fasting for 15 odd years or something. But for me, it's like I track everything: fasted, non-fasted, pre-weights, after weights. It really depends. Like, that's a very complex answer because we just need more information about what I'm happy to talk to this person if they want to reach out to me and look at the details and talk to them about it.
Well, someone said, I want to say I've done it for 3 weeks and both my ADHD has improved massively and my brain fog is nearly gone. I'm so happy for this. That's always amazing to hear.
That is great to hear, but I will tell you, Ben, as you know, like, that is not uncommon to hear. Like, brain fog is, like, we hear about it all the time. Anxiety, people literally, we get hundreds of people thanking us. And to us, that's really why we do it. That's why we feel that. And if I'm gonna get a little bit philosophical here, our dream is that over the next 4 years, and you know this, and you and I, we're very morally aligned on so many things in our values, and that's why I love you and I respect you and I appreciate you so much. But obviously, our dream is over the next few years is to put this into the hands of everybody without having to pay. And there are avenues around that, and that's what we're working for. We think that people should not have to make the decision between better groceries for their kids and getting a Mendy device. Or whatever it is that they need. But it's great to hear that. And thank you for taking the time to write it. Here's another one. I love the product. I appreciate the info. I've used it several times for the last couple of years for months at a time. I am currently picking it up again. It's very easy sometimes to just stop doing things that we see benefit us. We just got to get back to it. Consistency is key. One thing that I talk about is, once you get a 6-pack, that doesn't mean you should stop going to the gym. You keep going at it every day. You're getting better or you're not.
Let's answer one more and then I should probably get going. Someone said, would doing a few 3-minute sessions per day have the same effect as one 10-minute session? It's a really good question. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on this, Moha. I know, like I said earlier, there haven't been the right studies to specifically look at like which type of protocol is the best. I would think, my gut would tell me that they're probably pretty similar, but of course the 10-minute session, if you are very successful, if you're capable of, getting the ball to rise consistently, if you can do that